Sarah Martinez walked through the empty parking garage, her footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. The late evening shift at the downtown medical center had drained her, but she felt grateful for the work. As a trauma nurse, she had seen enough pain and suffering to last several lifetimes, yet she couldn't imagine doing anything else. The garage felt different tonight. Usually, a few cars remained scattered across the levels, but now it seemed almost deserted. Her white sedan sat alone under a flickering fluorescent light on the third level. She quickened her pace, keys already in her hand. What Sarah didn't know was that 3 men had been watching her routine for weeks. They had studied her schedule, noted her habits, and identified this parking garage as the perfect location for their plan. These weren't random criminals looking for a quick robbery. They belonged to a human trafficking network that specifically targeted healthcare workers, people with stable jobs, predictable schedules, and whose disappearances might initially be attributed to work stress or personal issues. Marcus, the leader of the group, had been tracking several potential targets across the city. Sarah caught his attention not just because of her profession, but because she lived alone and had recently moved from another state, meaning fewer local connections to notice if she went missing. Her social media showed she was single, dedicated to her work, and had limited family contact. The 3 men positioned themselves strategically around the garage. Marcus waited near the stairwell exit, while his partners Tony and Derek blocked the vehicle exit ramp. They had done this before in other cities, and their operation had been disturbingly successful. Young professional women simply vanished, and by the time anyone realized something was wrong, the victims were already hundreds of miles away, trapped in an underground network that stretched across multiple states. Sarah reached her car and fumbled with her keys. The fluorescent light above flickered more aggressively, casting strange shadows that made her increasingly nervous. She had always been cautious, especially working late shifts in the city. But tonight something felt particularly wrong. Her nursing training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming danger. As she opened her car door, she heard footsteps approaching from multiple directions. The sound echoed differently now, more purposeful and coordinated. Sarah's heart began racing as she realized the footsteps were deliberately surrounding her vehicle. She quickly got into the car and locked the doors, but when she turned the key, nothing happened. The engine didn't even attempt to turn over. Marcus appeared at her driver's side window, tapping gently with his knuckle. He wore a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes and held up what appeared to be jumper cables. His appearance was calculated to seem helpful rather than threatening. Clean clothes, casual demeanor. Nothing that would immediately signal danger to a potential victim. Tony and Derek emerged from behind nearby pillars, also carrying automotive equipment. To any casual observer, they would appear to be good Samaritans helping a stranded motorist. But Sarah noticed details that troubled her. Their positions blocked her escape routes. Their movements were too coordinated, and, despite their helpful appearance, something about their eyes reminded her of predators she had encountered during her childhood in rural Montana. Growing up on a ranch, Sarah had learned to read dangerous situations. Her father had taught her that predators, whether animal or human, often disguise their intentions until the moment they struck. The way these men moved, the timing of their appearance, and her car's sudden mechanical failure felt too convenient to be coincidental. Sarah kept her doors locked and reached for her phone, but discovered she had no signal. The concrete structure often blocked cell reception, but the timing seemed suspicious. She realized she needed to think quickly and carefully about her next moves. What Marcus and his partners didn't know was that Sarah Martinez wasn't just any trauma nurse. Before pursuing her medical career, she had served 6 years in the Navy, including specialized training that most people never heard about. Her last name wasn't originally Martinez. She had changed it after leaving the service for personal reasons that she rarely discussed with anyone. During her military service, Sarah had been part of a joint training program with various special operations units. While she hadn't been a SEAL herself, she had worked closely with SEAL teams as a combat medic, learning survival techniques, threat assessment, and tactical thinking that had nothing to do with traditional nursing education. The men approaching her car had chosen their target based on her current civilian life, completely unaware of her previous training and experience in high-stress, dangerous situations. They saw a tired healthcare worker who would be easy to intimidate and control. They had no idea they were about to encounter someone who had treated wounded warriors in combat zones and had been trained to remain calm under extreme pressure. Sarah's Mind shifted into a different mode as she assessed the situation. She counted 3 potential threats, noted their positions, and began calculating her options. The parking garage had multiple levels, stairwells, and exits. Her car might not start, but she wasn't trapped yet. Marcus tapped on her window again, this time more insistently. His friendly mask was beginning to slip, and Sarah could see the impatience growing in his expression. She needed to buy time and gather more information about their intentions and capabilities. She cracked her window just slightly, enough to hear him speak, but not enough for him to reach inside. Marcus began explaining that they had noticed her car trouble and wanted to help. But his words felt rehearsed and his body language contradicted his helpful tone. As the 3 men positioned themselves around her vehicle, Sarah realized that her military training was about to be put to a test she had never expected to face in civilian life. The skills she had learned working alongside SEALs in dangerous situations were about to become the difference between life and death in a downtown parking garage. Sarah kept the window cracked just enough to communicate, while maintaining her defensive position inside the locked vehicle. Marcus continued his act, explaining how they had jumper cables and tools to help fix her car, but Sarah noticed several red flags that confirmed her suspicions about their true intentions. First, none of them had approached with their own vehicle, which would be normal if they were genuinely trying to help jumpstart a car. Second, their positioning was tactical rather than helpful. They had spread out to cover escape routes rather than gathering around the engine compartment. Third, when she looked more closely at Marcus, she could see a small earpiece that suggested they were coordinating with others. During her time working with special operations teams, Sarah had learned to read people's intentions through their micro-expressions and body language. Marcus displayed the controlled aggression of someone preparing for action, not the casual concern of a good Samaritan. His partners kept glancing at their watches, suggesting they were operating on a timeline. Sarah made a calculated decision to gather more intelligence while appearing cooperative. She told Marcus that she would try starting the car once more before accepting help. As she turned the key again, she used the moment to scan the garage more thoroughly using techniques she had learned during combat zone operations. She spotted additional concerning details. A van with tinted windows parked on the level below, positioned for quick access to the main exit. Security cameras in the area had been spray-painted or covered with tape. Most importantly, she noticed that the elevator had been disabled, forcing anyone wanting to leave to use the stairwells where the men could easily intercept them. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. These men had prepared extensively for this operation, which meant they were professionals with experience in abducting people. Sarah realized that once they got her out of the car, her chances of escape would diminish rapidly. Her military training kicked in fully as she began formulating a tactical response. She remembered lessons from SEAL instructors about turning disadvantageous situations into opportunities through careful planning and decisive action. The key was to shift from a defensive position to an offensive one before the attackers expected it. Sarah told Marcus that her car seemed to have electrical problems and thanked him for offering to help. She asked him to give her just a moment to gather her purse and medical bag from the passenger seat. This request seemed reasonable and bought her additional time to prepare. While pretending to organize her belongings, Sarah was actually accessing items that most people wouldn't think of as defensive tools. Her medical bag contained scalpels which could serve as weapons in close combat. Her keychain held a small tactical flashlight that could temporarily blind attackers in the dimly lit garage. Most importantly, she had a small emergency radio that operated on different frequencies than regular cell phones. As Sarah continued her preparations, she noticed that Derek, one of the men near her car, was becoming increasingly impatient. He kept looking toward the stairwell and checking his phone, suggesting they were concerned about timing or potential witnesses arriving. Tony, positioned near the garage exit, had moved closer to her vehicle. Sarah realized that their patience was running out, and they would likely attempt to force her out of the car within the next few minutes. She needed to act before they escalated to breaking her windows or using other methods to extract her from the vehicle. During her service years, Sarah had trained in vehicle-based combat scenarios. She knew that cars could be weapons as well as protection, and that mobility was often more valuable than armor. Her vehicle might not start through normal methods, but she remembered alternative techniques for emergency situations. Sarah had also learned that successful operations required understanding your enemy's expectations, and then doing something completely different. These men expected her to remain passive and frightened, to eventually comply with their demands out of fear. They had no reason to suspect that their target had extensive training in tactical thinking in combat situations. The human trafficking operation these men worked for had succeeded because they chose victims who fit predictable patterns, people who would freeze in crisis situations, who could be intimidated into compliance, and who lacked the training or mindset to fight back effectively. Sarah appeared to fit their victim profile perfectly, but appearances could be very deceiving. As Marcus became more insistent about her accepting help, Sarah made a decision that would surprise everyone involved. Instead of continuing to play the role of a frightened victim, she was about to demonstrate why people who had served alongside Navy SEALs learned to think and act differently in dangerous situations. She rolled down her window another inch and asked Marcus a simple question that would reveal whether her suspicions were correct. She asked him which military unit he had served with, mentioning that she could usually recognize fellow veterans. The question seemed innocent enough, but Sarah was watching for his reaction. Marcus hesitated for just a moment too long before claiming he had been in the Army, but his response lacked the specific details that real veterans typically shared, and he couldn't answer her follow-up question about which base he had trained at. This confirmed that he was lying about his background and had been prepared with a cover story. More importantly, Marcus's momentary confusion gave Sarah the opening she had been waiting for. In that split second when his attention was focused on fabricating details about fictional military service, Sarah acted with the speed and precision that had been drilled into her during countless training exercises. The men surrounding her car had made a critical error in their planning. They had assumed their target would remain predictable and passive, giving them time to execute their operation according to their preferred timeline. They were about to discover that some people don't follow the script that criminals expect. Sarah's years of working in trauma medicine had taught her that seconds could mean the difference between life and death. Her military training had taught her that hesitation in combat situations usually favored the enemy. As she prepared to implement her escape plan, she drew on both sets of skills to turn a desperate situation into an opportunity for survival. Sarah's moment of action came swiftly and without warning. While Marcus was still fumbling through his fake military story, she simultaneously activated her emergency radio and triggered the car's panic alarm system using a hidden button she had installed after moving to the city. The combination created a chaos of sound that echoed throughout the concrete structure. The loud alarm served multiple purposes. It could potentially attract attention from security or late-night workers in nearby buildings. More importantly, it disrupted the men's ability to coordinate and communicate clearly. Sarah had learned from SEAL tactics that controlling sound and chaos often determined the outcome of tactical situations. Before Marcus could react to the alarm, Sarah implemented the next phase of her plan. She had quietly shifted the car into neutral while pretending to organize her belongings. Now she released the parking brake and allowed the vehicle to begin rolling toward Tony, who was positioned near the exit ramp. The slight incline of the parking garage gave her car enough momentum to become a moving threat. Tony had to jump aside quickly to avoid being struck, which disrupted their coordinated positioning around her vehicle. Sarah used this moment of confusion to exit her car on the side opposite from Marcus and Derek. Her movements were precise and deliberate, based on training scenarios she had practiced hundreds of times during her military service. She kept low to use the car as cover while moving toward the stairwell that offered the best tactical advantage. Her medical bag and emergency supplies came with her, but she left behind anything that might slow her movement. Marcus shouted commands to his partners, but the echoing alarm made clear communication difficult. Sarah could see their coordination breaking down as they struggled to adapt to a situation that didn't match their expected scenario. Their victim was supposed to be cooperative and frightened, not tactically aware and actively resisting. Derek moved to intercept Sarah's path to the stairwell, but she had anticipated this response. During combat medical training, she had learned to treat wounded soldiers while under fire, which required moving efficiently through hostile environments. She used concrete pillars and parked cars as cover while advancing toward her objective. As Derek closed in on her position, Sarah made a decision that demonstrated the difference between civilian thinking and military training. Instead of trying to avoid confrontation, she chose to engage on her terms while she still had advantages. Sarah had her medical bag positioned for quick access to defensive tools. When Derek reached for her expecting easy compliance, he instead encountered a scalpel wielded by someone trained in precise movements under pressure. The blade created a defensive barrier that forced him to reconsider his approach while she continued moving toward the stairwell. Tony had recovered from avoiding the rolling. Karen was now moving to block her access to the exit. But Sarah had studied the garage layout during her weeks of working at the medical center. She knew about a maintenance access door that most people overlooked, and her route toward the stairwell was actually a feint to draw the men away from her real escape path. The maintenance door led to a service corridor that connected to the building's main structure. Sarah had noticed it during one of her breaks when she had explored the garage to understand all available exits. This kind of environmental awareness had been emphasized during her military training. Always know multiple ways out of any location, Marcus was becoming increasingly frustrated as his carefully planned operation fell apart. The woman who was supposed to be an easy target was demonstrating tactical awareness that none of them had expected. Her movements showed training and experience that didn't match her civilian appearance. Sarah reached the maintenance door and found it unlocked as she had hoped. Many service areas in older buildings remained accessible for emergency situations. She quickly moved through the door and found herself in a narrow corridor lined with pipes and electrical systems. The corridor was dimly lit, but provided cover and multiple directional options. Sarah's emergency radio finally connected to a security frequency, and she began transmitting her location and situation. She kept the message brief and clear, using terminology that would immediately convey the seriousness of the threat to anyone monitoring emergency channels. Behind her, she could hear the three men arguing about how to proceed. Their operation had been designed for quick execution in a controlled environment, but Sarah had transformed the situation into something that required different tactics and skills. They were discovering that their victim had capabilities they hadn't planned for. Sarah's military training included lessons about escape and evasion in hostile territory. The service corridor system was similar to environments she had navigated during training exercises. She moved quietly but quickly, putting distance between herself and her pursuers while looking for connections to other parts of the building complex. The men were now facing a dilemma that hadn't existed in their previous operations. Their target had escaped their immediate control and was actively calling for help, while moving through an environment they weren't familiar with. Every moment they spent pursuing her increased their risk of exposure and capture. Sarah found a junction where the service corridor connected to the main building's infrastructure. She could access different floors, exit to the street level, or even reach the building's security office. Her options had multiplied significantly from the limited choices she had faced in the parking garage. As she paused to assess her next move, Sarah reflected on how her background had prepared her for this moment. The years of working alongside special operations personnel had taught her that successful tactics required adaptability, environmental awareness, and the willingness to take calculated risks when defensive positions became untenable. The three men who had planned to abduct her were learning a harsh lesson about assumptions and preparation. They had researched her civilian life but had no knowledge of her military background. Now they faced a situation where their intended victim had become an active threat to their operation, using skills and tactics they hadn't anticipated encountering. Agent Walsh arrived at the scene within 20 minutes of Sarah's initial emergency transmission. Her team brought specialized equipment for tracking suspects through complex building environments and had experience with human trafficking networks that operated across state lines. Sarah's tactical communication had provided them with more actionable intelligence than they typically received from victims. The FBI team quickly established a command center in the hospital security office, where Sarah continued providing detailed information about her attackers' methods and capabilities. Her military background allowed her to offer insights that helped law enforcement understand the level of sophistication they were dealing with. Walsh was particularly interested in Sarah's observation about the men's communication equipment and their coordinated timing. These details suggested connections to larger criminal organizations that had been operating in multiple cities. Sarah's encounter might provide the breakthrough they needed to identify and disrupt a significant trafficking network. Meanwhile, the three men were trapped in an increasingly desperate situation. Derek had finally found his way out of the service corridors, but emerged directly into the sight of waiting police officers. His attempt to blend in with hospital staff failed immediately when security personnel, who knew all the legitimate employees, identified him as an intruder. Derek's capture provided law enforcement with their first direct link to the criminal organization. Under questioning, he revealed information about staging areas and communication protocols that helped authorities understand how the network operated. His cooperation was motivated by federal charges that could result in life imprisonment without parole. Tony had attempted to escape through the parking garage where the operation began, but found himself confronted by a tactical team that had been specifically briefed about his appearance and likely behavior patterns. Sarah's detailed descriptions had enabled law enforcement to prepare for exactly the kind of evasion tactics he attempted to use at the capture of 2 members of the group. Provided law enforcement with electronic devices, vehicle information, and communication records that revealed connections to criminal activities in 6 different states. Sarah's decision to fight back had exposed a network that had been operating successfully for several years. Marcus remained at large within the building complex, but his options were becoming increasingly limited. The coordinated law enforcement response had sealed all conventional exit routes, and his partner's capture meant that any backup plans or extraction methods were compromised. Sarah worked with Agent Walsh to analyze the intelligence being gathered from the captured men. Her military experience with threat assessment helped identify patterns in the organization's methods that might predict Marcus's next moves. This collaboration between victim and law enforcement was providing insights that neither could have achieved alone. The investigation revealed that Sarah had been targeted as part of a larger operation that planned to abduct multiple healthcare workers from different hospitals across the region. Her successful resistance had prevented not only her own abduction, but potentially saved several other women who were being surveilled by the same criminal network. Rodriguez, the security chief, implemented additional safety measures throughout the hospital complex based on lessons learned from Sarah's experience. The protocol she had suggested, drawn from military security practices, would make it much more difficult for similar operations to succeed in the future. Marcus made a desperate attempt to escape by accessing the hospital's upper floors and trying to reach the roof. But the building's security systems, now fully activated, tracked his movement through key card readers and motion sensors. His unfamiliarity with the building's layout worked against him as he became trapped in areas with limited exit options. The tactical team that finally cornered Marcus was led by officers with military backgrounds who understood the strategic thinking that Sarah had employed during her escape. They used similar environmental awareness and tactical positioning to ensure that Marcus had no opportunity to resist capture or threaten other people in the building. With all 3 men in custody, the investigation expanded rapidly, as federal agencies used the intelligence gathered to identify other members of the trafficking network. Sarah's detailed observations and tactical communication had provided law enforcement with their most significant breakthrough in a case that had been under investigation for over 2 years. The criminal organization that had seemed sophisticated and well protected was rapidly being dismantled as authorities followed the connections revealed through Marcus, Tony, and Derek's capture. Safe houses, financial networks, and communication systems were being identified and disrupted across multiple states. Sarah's role evolved from victim to key witness as federal prosecutors prepared cases against the entire trafficking network. Her military background and detailed observations made her an exceptionally credible witness who could explain the tactical aspects of the criminal's operations in ways that juries could understand. Agent Walsh noted that Sarah's case demonstrated the importance of victim preparation and tactical awareness in disrupting criminal organizations. Most trafficking operations succeeded because victims were caught off guard and responded predictably. Sarah's military training had enabled her to respond in ways that turned the criminals' advantages against them. The hospital where Sarah worked recognized her actions with commendations for bravery and tactical thinking that protected not only herself but potentially many other people. Her colleagues gained new respect for her background and the skills that she had never discussed during her civilian nursing career. Law enforcement agencies began consulting with Sarah about training programs that could help potential victims recognize and respond to trafficking attempts. Her experience demonstrated that proper preparation and tactical thinking could transform apparent victimization into opportunities to disrupt criminal operations. The success of Sarah's resistance and the subsequent investigation sent messages throughout criminal networks that healthcare workers might not be the easy targets they had previously assumed. The risk-to-reward ratio of targeting medical professionals had changed significantly as a result of one person's decision to fight back, using skills that most civilians never acquire. 2 years after the parking garage incident, Sarah stood before a conference room filled with law enforcement officers, military personnel, and healthcare administrators from across the country. She had been invited to share her experience as part of a national initiative to improve tactical awareness training for civilians who might face similar threats. The program that grew from Sarah's experience had been implemented in hospitals, schools, and other institutions where professionals worked predictable schedules that made them vulnerable to surveillance and targeting. Her case had demonstrated that tactical thinking could be taught to civilians in ways that significantly improved their ability to survive and resist criminal activity. Agent Walsh, now promoted to lead the FBI's Enhanced Human Trafficking Task Force, introduced Sarah to the conference as someone whose actions had fundamentally changed how law enforcement approached these cases. The intelligence gathering and tactical communication methods that Sarah had employed were now standard. Training for potential victims, Sarah's presentation focused on the practical applications of military tactical thinking in civilian situations. She explained how environmental awareness, threat assessment, and strategic planning could be adapted for people who had never served in the military, but might face dangerous situations in their daily lives. The audience learned about specific techniques that Sarah had used during her escape, including how to maintain communication during emergencies, how to use building infrastructure for tactical advantage, and how to transform disadvantageous situations into opportunities for resistance and escape. Medical professionals in the audience were particularly interested in how Sarah had applied her clinical training to tactical situations. Her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure and make rapid assessments had been crucial to her survival, and these were skills that other healthcare workers could develop and apply. The conference revealed that Sarah's case had inspired similar training programs internationally. Law enforcement agencies in several countries had adopted the tactical communication protocols that she had developed, and her methods for victim resistance were being taught in self-defense programs worldwide. Rodriguez, the hospital security chief who had responded to Sarah's emergency call, presented data showing how the security improvements implemented after her experience had prevented multiple attempted crimes at medical facilities throughout the region. The proactive approach to security that Sarah had advocated was proving effective in deterring criminal activity. Sarah had also continued her nursing career while serving as a consultant for federal agencies investigating human trafficking cases. Her unique combination of medical expertise and tactical training made her valuable for understanding how criminal organizations targeted healthcare workers and what countermeasures were most effective. The original investigation that began with Sarah's resistance had ultimately led to prosecutions in 12 states and 3 countries. The international connections revealed through the criminal network had exposed trafficking operations that were much larger and more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized. During the question and answer session, a young nurse from Seattle asked Sarah what advice she would give to healthcare workers who worried about their safety but had no military background. Sarah's response emphasized that tactical thinking was a mindset that could be learned by anyone willing to prepare and practice. She explained that the most important elements were situational awareness, environmental knowledge, and the willingness to act decisively when threats were identified. These skills didn't require military training, but they did require conscious preparation and regular practice. A police detective from Denver asked about the psychological aspects of Sarah's experience and how she had maintained focus during such a high-stress situation. Sarah credited her medical training with teaching her to compartmentalize emotions and focus on immediate objectives, skills that translated directly to tactical situations. The conference concluded with presentations about ongoing efforts to combat human trafficking using lessons learned from Sarah's case. Federal agencies had developed new protocols for responding to these crimes, and international cooperation had improved significantly as a result of intelligence gathered from the investigation. Sarah, reflected on how her experience had evolved from a terrifying personal encounter into a catalyst for systematic improvements in public safety and victim protection. Her decision to fight back using military tactics had created changes that extended far beyond her individual situation. The training programs inspired by her experience were now protecting thousands of potential victims who had learned to think tactically about personal safety. The criminal organizations that had previously operated with relative impunity now faced victims who were prepared to resist effectively, and law enforcement agencies equipped with better tools for investigation and prosecution. As Sarah returned to her work at the hospital, she carried with her the knowledge that her background had prepared her for a moment when tactical skills meant the difference between freedom and captivity. Her experience had demonstrated that the training and mindset developed in military service could provide protection and empowerment in civilian life in ways that she had never expected. The legacy of that night in the parking garage continued to grow as more people learned to think strategically about personal safety, and law enforcement agencies refined their approaches to combating human trafficking. Sarah's decision to resist using military tactics had created a ripple effect that was still expanding, protecting people she would never meet and disrupting criminal operations around the world. Her story had become proof that individual preparation and tactical thinking could triumph over sophisticated criminal organizations, and that the skills learned in military service retained their value long after the uniform was put away. The SEALs she had worked with during her military career would have been proud to know that their influence had helped her turn a moment of extreme danger into an opportunity for justice and protection of others. Sarah moved through the service corridor with purposeful speed, her emergency radio crackling with responses from multiple agencies. The building's security office had received her transmission, and she could hear police dispatch coordinating with hospital security. Her tactical communication training was paying off as she provided clear, actionable information about the threat and her location. The corridor system was more extensive than she had initially realized. It connected not only to different floors of the medical complex, but also to adjacent office buildings in the downtown district. This gave Sarah multiple escape routes and the ability to emerge at locations far from where her pursuers expected to find her. Behind her, she could hear the three men had split up to search different paths through the building. Their coordination was breaking down further as they struggled to adapt their plan to an environment they hadn't scouted. Sarah's decision to move the confrontation away from their prepared location was forcing them to operate without their usual advantages. Marcus had sent Tony to search the main stairwells while Derek attempted to follow Sarah through the maintenance areas. But Derek was discovering that service corridors required different movement skills than regular building navigation. The narrow spaces, low lighting, and unfamiliar layouts slowed his progress significantly. Sarah reached a junction that offered access to the hospital's main security office. Her radio transmissions had provided enough information for security personnel to begin lockdown procedures throughout the complex. Exterior exits were being monitored, and additional security was being deployed to key locations. The hospital's security chief, a former police officer named Rodriguez, had responded personally to Sarah's emergency call. He understood immediately that they were dealing with a sophisticated criminal operation rather than a simple assault attempt. The coordination and planning that Sarah described indicated professional criminals with experience in abduction operations. Rodriguez had activated protocols designed for exactly this type of situation. The hospital treated victims of human trafficking regularly, and staff had been trained to recognize and respond to related threats. Sarah's detailed tactical communication had given them everything they needed to implement appropriate countermeasures. Sarah emerged from the service corridor into a secured area of the hospital where Rodriguez and two other security officers were waiting. Her appearance surprised them. Despite the dangerous situation she had escaped, she showed the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to high-stress environments. Rodriguez quickly briefed Sarah on the response that was being coordinated. Police units were surrounding the building complex, but they needed more specific information about the men's capabilities and intentions. Sarah's military background became valuable, as she provided tactical assessments that helped law enforcement plan their approach. The three men pursuing Sarah were beginning to realize that their operation had become a disaster. What should have been a quick abduction had turned into a manhunt with them as the targets. Their communication equipment was picking up increasing radio chatter from law enforcement agencies converging on their location. Marcus made the decision to abandon the operation and focus on escape. But Sarah had anticipated this possibility during her tactical planning. Her radio communications had included descriptions of the men and their likely escape routes. Police units were already positioning to intercept them if they attempted to leave the area. Tony discovered that the main exits from the building complex were now monitored by security personnel. The careful positioning that had been meant to trap Sarah was now working against the men as law. Enforcement used the same choke points to contain them within the building. Derek had become lost in the service corridor system and was making noise as he tried to find his way back to familiar areas. His lack of experience with tactical movement in confined spaces was creating opportunities for security personnel to track his location through the building's infrastructure. Sarah worked with Rodriguez to coordinate the response effort. Her knowledge of the building layout, combined with her tactical training, helped security teams predict where the men might attempt to hide or escape. She had transformed from victim to strategic advisor. In the space of less than an hour, the radio network that Sarah had accessed was part of a regional emergency response system that connected multiple law enforcement agencies. Her initial call had triggered responses from city police, county sheriff departments, and federal agencies that monitored human trafficking activities. Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force had been monitoring the emergency frequencies when Sarah's transmission came through. The tactical terminology and professional communication style immediately caught her attention, suggesting that this wasn't a typical victim calling for help. Walsh dispatched federal resources to support the local response, including specialized teams trained in apprehending human trafficking networks. Sarah's description of the men's coordination and preparation matched patterns they had seen in other operations across multiple states. The three men were discovering that their carefully planned operation had connected them to a much larger law enforcement response than they had prepared for. What they thought would be a simple abduction in a controlled environment had become a multi-agency manhunt with sophisticated coordination and resources. Marcus attempted to reach his handlers through encrypted communication, but found that their support network was not prepared for this level of law enforcement attention. The organization that sent them expected their operatives to handle problems quietly and disappear, without creating investigations that might threaten the larger network. Sarah's decision to fight back tactically rather than submit passively had created exactly the kind of situation that criminal organizations tried to avoid. Instead of a missing person case that might not be investigated seriously for days or weeks, they now faced active pursuit by multiple agencies with real-time intelligence and coordination. As law enforcement tightened their perimeter around the building complex, the three men faced decreasing options for escape. Their operation had been designed for success in a controlled environment, but Sarah's military training and tactical thinking had turned their advantage into a disadvantage that was becoming more severe with each passing minute. 6 months after the incident, Sarah found herself in a federal courthouse providing testimony that would help prosecute one of the largest human trafficking networks ever dismantled in the region. Her detailed observations and tactical analysis had become crucial evidence in cases that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of victims who had not been as fortunate as she had been. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, had built their case around the intelligence gathered from Sarah's encounter and the subsequent investigation. Her military background gave her testimony a credibility and precision that impressed both judges and juries who heard the complex details of the criminal organization's operations. During her testimony, Sarah explained how the men's tactical mistakes had revealed their training and organizational structure. Her analysis helped prosecutors demonstrate that this wasn't random criminal activity, but a sophisticated operation with connections across state lines and international borders. The evidence gathered from Marcus, Tony, and Derek's electronic devices had led investigators to safe houses in 4 different states where other victims were being held. Sarah's decision to fight back had directly resulted in the rescue of 17 women who had been trapped in the trafficking network for periods, ranging from weeks to several years. Agent Walsh testified about how Sarah's tactical communication during the emergency had enabled law enforcement to respond with unprecedented speed and coordination. The detailed intelligence she provided had allowed them to apprehend the suspects before they could destroy evidence or alert other members of their organization. The defense attorneys attempted to portray the men as low-level criminals who didn't understand the full scope of the organization they worked for, but Sarah's testimony about their coordinated tactics, professional equipment, and systematic approach demonstrated that they were experienced operatives who knew exactly what they were doing. During cross-examination, Sarah's military background became even more relevant as defense lawyers tried to suggest that her training made her an unreliable witness who saw threats where none existed. Instead, her calm, factual recounting of events and technical explanations of tactical procedures impressed the jury with her credibility and attention to detail. The trial revealed disturbing details about how the trafficking network had operated for years without detection. They had specifically targeted healthcare workers, teachers, and other professionals whose disappearances might initially be attributed to job stress or personal problems rather than criminal activity. Sarah learned that she had been under surveillance for 3 weeks before the attempted abduction. The criminals had studied her schedule, identified her vulnerabilities, and planned their operation based on patterns they had observed. Her decision to explore the building's security features during her breaks had unknowingly provided her with the knowledge that saved her life. The investigation had also revealed that the parking garage incident was meant to be the first in a series of abductions planned for that week. Other women at different hospitals had been targeted using identical methods. Sarah's successful resistance had disrupted the entire operation and saved multiple potential victims. Federal prosecutors used Sarah's case to demonstrate the sophistication and interstate nature of modern human trafficking operations. Her experience became a cornerstone of their argument for enhanced penalties and increased resources for combating these crimes. The trial attracted national attention as news media reported on how one person's military training and tactical thinking had dismantled a criminal network that law enforcement had been trying to identify for years. Sarah's story became an example of how specialized skills could be applied in unexpected situations to protect both individuals and communities. Marcus received a life sentence without possibility of parole, while Tony and Derek received lengthy federal sentences that reflected their cooperation with investigators. The prosecutions continued as additional members of the network were identified and apprehended based on evidence gathered from the original investigation. Sarah returned to her work as a trauma nurse, but with enhanced security measures and a new role consulting with law enforcement agencies about tactical awareness training for potential victims. Her experience had demonstrated that proper preparation and strategic thinking could turn apparent helplessness into effective resistance. The hospital, where Sarah worked, implemented new security protocols based on her recommendations. Other medical facilities throughout the region adopted similar measures as they realized that their staff members faced threats they had never previously considered. Law enforcement agencies began developing training programs that incorporated lessons learned from Sarah's experience. Her tactical approach to victim resistance became a model for teaching people how to think strategically about personal safety in ways that could disrupt criminal operations rather than simply avoiding them. The criminal organization that had seemed untouchable was completely dismantled. Within 8 months of Sarah's initial encounter with their operatives, safe houses were closed, financial networks were frozen, and dozens of people involved in the trafficking operation were prosecuted in federal courts. Sarah's decision to fight back using skills learned during her military service had created a cascade of consequences that extended far beyond her individual situation. Her tactical thinking and strategic resistance had protected not only herself, but dozens of other potential victims, and had provided law enforcement with tools for combating similar criminal organizations.